They were attacking with divisions, the Germans were, and I had one rifle company with about 100 men.
They thought they had the upper hand, but time and again, Nazi soldiers picked the wrong fight with the wrong Americans.
I was down to my last box of ammunition. We had no food, and we were hurting, but we were a cohesive unit.
From Castle Itter's surreal alliance to Patton's ruthless counterstrike, these weren't just battles, they were humiliations. These are the moments Nazi forces messed with the wrong American soldiers. The defense of Bastogne, General Anthony's legendary response. In December 1944, Hitler launched his final desperate gamble in the West with Operation Watch on the Rhine, a massive assault through the Ardennes forest targeting a 75-mile stretch of the front held by 4 inexperienced or battle-worn American divisions. The strategic town of Bastogne, a crucial road junction, became the focal point of this offensive when Nazi forces surrounded the 101st Airborne Division, expecting a quick surrender. The Screaming Eagles found themselves completely encircled, cut off from supply lines, running low on ammunition and medical supplies, and facing the brutal Belgian winter with inadequate clothing.
I was down to my last box of ammunition. We had no food, and we were hurting, but we were a cohesive unit.
German forces enjoyed overwhelming superiority in numbers and heavy equipment. The situation appeared hopeless as the paratroopers rationed ammunition, created makeshift medical facilities, and used every building as a defensive position. On December 22, 1944, German officers approached under a white flag, carrying what they believed to be a reasonable surrender ultimatum. The formal message warned that if the Americans refused to surrender, German forces would destroy the town and all defenders with artillery and air power. The Germans offered Geneva Convention treatment and waited confidently for acceptance of what seemed like the only rational choice given the circumstances. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response became legendary. Nuts! His immediate reaction was incredulous laughter, followed by this single word that would echo through military history. When staff officers asked what official response to send, McAuliffe decided his spontaneous reaction was perfect. The formal reply read, "To the German commander, nuts, the American commander." The German officers were initially confused by the colloquial American expression, requiring explanation before understanding the complete rejection. This defiant response perfectly captured not only McAuliffe's determination, but the fighting spirit of every trapped American soldier who refused to surrender despite impossible odds. American paratroopers held the town against relentless assaults until relieved by Patton's Third Army on December 26th, turning Bastogne into an impregnable fortress. The successful defense was more than a tactical victory. It represented a crucial turning point that shattered Nazi plans to split Allied forces and reach Antwerp, contributing to German casualties of approximately 80,000, 100,000 troops and hundreds of tanks, severely weakening their ability to resist subsequent Allied advances. The Americans' defiance at Bastogne was unforgettable, but what happened just a few days earlier would ignite something even deeper: rage. The Malmedy Massacre Backlash, American Fury Unleashed. December 17, 1944, witnessed one of World War II's most shocking war crimes that would fundamentally change combat in the European theater. The 1st SS Panzer Regiment, led by SS OHB Sturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, massacred 84 unarmed American POWs near Malmedy during the Battle of the Bulge. This atrocity occurred when Kampfgruppe Peiper, spearheading the German advance, encountered elements of the American 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. These American soldiers, primarily support personnel, were quickly overwhelmed by superior German armored forces. Under normal circumstances, their capture should have resulted in Geneva Convention treatment as prisoners of war. However, Peiper and his SS troops had different intentions, operating under extreme time pressure with orders to advance rapidly toward the Meuse River. The American prisoners were herded into a field near Baugnier Crossroads, south of Malmedy. What followed shocked the civilized world. SS troops opened fire on the unarmed prisoners with machine guns and small arms, methodically executing soldiers who had surrendered in good faith.
To put it simply, near this town of Malmedy, Belgium, the 150 were made captive, and about 84 of them were then shot down by SS forces that captured them.
Some Americans survived by playing dead among their comrades' bodies, providing crucial eyewitness testimony about the systematic killings. SS soldiers walked among the corpses, delivering coup de grace shots to anyone showing life signs, ensuring their crime's completion. News of the atrocity spread rapidly through American units like wildfire, galvanizing soldiers to fight with renewed ferocity. Word traveled through American lines via survivors, intelligence reports, and radio communications. The effect on American morale was immediate and profound, but opposite to German intentions. Rather than terrorizing Americans into submission, the massacre had the reverse effect that surprised veteran German commanders. "Remember Malmedy" became a rallying cry echoing through foxholes and command posts. Units previously fighting for tactical objectives now fought for something deeply personal and emotionally charged. American soldiers who had treated German prisoners with relative restraint now approached captured SS troops with barely contained rage. The massacre also stiffened American resolve throughout the Battle of the Bulge. Soldiers who might have considered surrender when facing overwhelming odds now fought to the death, knowing SS capture might mean execution rather than imprisonment. This determination was particularly evident in defensive actions like Bastogne's siege and St. Vith's defense, where American forces held against impossible odds. As the word Malmedy spread, American lines braced for what came next. St. Vith stand, delaying the German timetable. During the opening phases of the Battle of the Bulge, Nazi commanders identified the critical road junction of St. Vith as essential to their offensive success. Nazi forces targeted this vital transportation hub, expecting to overrun the inexperienced American 7th Armored Division. The town's strategic importance couldn't be overstated. Multiple roads converged there, making it essential for German forces to maintain their advance toward the Meuse River and ultimately Antwerp. The German plan relied heavily on speed and maintaining momentum. The offensive depended on rapid movement to cross the Meuse River within days, exploiting surprise and poor weather that grounded Allied air forces. Any significant delay could allow Allied forces to reorganize, bring up reinforcements, and potentially derail the entire operation. St. Vith represented a critical checkpoint on this timeline. The 7th Armored Division, commanded by Brigadier General Robert W. Hasbrouck, had been rushed into the area as German forces broke through American lines. Many of the division's soldiers were indeed relatively inexperienced in major combat operations, and German intelligence had identified this as a potential weakness to exploit.
I immediately jumped out of the bed, ran downstairs, and rang up division headquarters, which was then about 40 miles away at Wiltz. And I got a sleepy major on the phone. I asked him what was going on in the honeymoon sector, and he said he didn't know. And I said, you better find out. I said, there's either a major attack or a raid in force going on there, and artillery's coming in like the very mischief.
The Germans expected to sweep through St. Vith with minimal resistance, clearing the way for their armored spearheads. However, the American defenders had several advantages that German planners had underestimated. Despite being outnumbered, American troops established a defensive perimeter that proved far more resilient than German commanders anticipated. The 7th Armored Division, reinforced by elements of other units including parts of the 106th Infantry Division that had escaped encirclement, used every available building, roadblock, and natural obstacle to slow the German advance. The fighting around St. Vith was characterized by small unit actions, with American soldiers demonstrating remarkable tenacity when faced with overwhelming odds. Tank destroyers and anti-tank guns were positioned to create killing zones at key approaches to the town. Engineers worked frantically to prepare demolitions and obstacles that would further delay German armor. German frustration with the unexpected resistance at St. Vith began to compound as hours turned into days. The delay disrupted German offensive plans throughout the Battle of the Bulge, forcing commanders to commit additional resources to reducing what should have been a minor obstacle. This diversion of forces weakened German efforts elsewhere along the front. Eventually, the weight of German numbers and firepower forced the evacuation of St. Vith, but the mission had been accomplished. The days of delay allowed Allied commanders to stabilize their lines, rush reinforcements to critical points like Bastogne, and begin planning counterattacks. The inexperienced 7th Armored Division had proven that American soldiers could fight effectively, even when outnumbered and surrounded, but the Germans weren't done trying tricks. When brute force stalled, they turned to deception, and that's when Operation Greif kicked in with disastrous results. Operation Greif's spectacular failure when deception backfired. Operation Greif represented one of Nazi Germany's most audacious deception plans during World War II. Nazi commandos, led by SS Oberstturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, disguised themselves as American soldiers to sow chaos during the Battle of the Bulge. Skorzeny, known as Hitler's favorite commando for his daring 1943 rescue of Mussolini, seemed the perfect choice to lead this unprecedented infiltration operation. Their objectives included capturing key bridges across the Meuse River, spreading disinformation, misdirecting Allied reinforcements, and creating general chaos to multiply the main offensive's effectiveness. Skorzeny assembled approximately 150 men, carefully selected for English language abilities and American cultural knowledge. These soldiers underwent intensive training in American mannerisms, military procedures, and cultural knowledge, studying popular culture, military slang, and regional dialects. They memorized American sports, entertainment, and geography details, believing this would help them pass casual questioning. The Germans equipped infiltrators with authentic American uniforms, weapons, and equipment captured during previous battles. They acquired American vehicles, including jeeps and trucks, complete with proper Allied markings and documentation. Attention to detail was remarkable, from authentic American cigarettes and chewing gum to properly forged identification papers and military orders. However, the operation unraveled almost immediately upon implementation. American troops quickly identified infiltrators by asking questions about American culture, particularly baseball trivia, and other distinctly American cultural references. The American response to infiltration threats was both practical and effective, with word spreading rapidly through units about the German deception. Cultural knowledge gaps that doomed German infiltrators were often surprisingly basic. Despite intensive training, many commandos lacked deep, intuitive understanding of American culture that comes only from lived experience. They might know baseball facts, but miss emotional nuances of team loyalties. They could recite geography, but fail to understand regional accents and local customs. American soldiers developed increasingly sophisticated test questions beyond simple factual knowledge. They asked about childhood games, regional food preferences, popular radio shows, and local slang, varying from state to state. They inquired about American military life details that would be second nature to genuine GIs, but difficult for even well-trained infiltrators to master completely. This counterintelligence response led to the capture and execution of several German saboteurs, disrupting Hitler's plans to destabilize Allied lines. Operation Greif's failure demonstrated fundamental German intelligence weaknesses about Allied forces and American society, revealing Nazi leadership's ideological preconceptions that prevented accurate assessment of American resilience, adaptability, and cultural cohesion. Operation Greif showed how far the Nazis would go to sow chaos, but nothing could have predicted what happened next at Castle Itter. The Battle of Castle Itter, history's strangest alliance. In World War II's chaotic final days, as the Third Reich crumbled, one of history's most extraordinary military engagements unfolded at a small Austrian castle. What unfolded was an alliance no one saw coming. American GIs, Wehrmacht defectors, Austrian resistance fighters, and French VIP prisoners, all fighting side by side against the SS. Built in the 13th century, Castle Itter had been turned into a prison in 1943 by the Nazis, holding high-value French prisoners. This wasn't your average POW camp. Inside were former Prime Ministers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, Generals Maurice Gamelin and Maxime Weygand, tennis star Jean Borotra, Labour leader Léon Jouot, and Marie-Agnès Caillot, Charles de Gaulle's own sister. By May 1945, the war was nearly over. Hitler was dead. Germany's surrender was days away. SS guards abandoned the castle, leaving the prisoners vulnerable to roving death squads. Fearing execution, the inmates armed themselves and sent out messages for help. One prisoner reached the Austrian town of Wörgl, where Major Josef Sepp Gangl, a Wehrmacht officer who had turned against the Nazis, agreed to help, but he needed more firepower. So, under a white flag, he contacted the US 12th Armored Division. Captain Jack Lee Jr., commanding a tank unit, answered the call. On May 4th, Lee arrived with 14 soldiers, a Sherman tank nicknamed Besotten Jenny, and 10 German fighters loyal to Gangl. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, the odd alliance prepared for a fight. Even the French VIPs refused to sit it out. To top off the irony, the defense was organized by Kurt Siegfried Schrader, a recovering SS officer who had befriended the prisoners and now led the charge against his former comrades. At dawn on May 5th, over 100 SS troops from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division attacked. The defenders used the castle's walls to their full advantage, but Besotten Jenny was quickly destroyed by an anti-tank gun. That left them exposed. Major Gangl was shot and killed, protecting Paul Reynaud, the only defender to die. As ammo ran low, French prisoner Jean Borotra sprinted through enemy lines to get help. By 4 p.m., US reinforcements arrived and crushed the SS. Roughly 100 Nazi troops were taken prisoner in what remains one of the most bizarre and heroic stands in military history, a moment when enemies became brothers in arms to defeat a greater evil. And while battles like this unfolded in the Alps, one man was already rewriting the war on a much larger scale: Patton. Patton's lightning counterattack, strategic brilliance in motion. Winter 1944 presented Allied forces with their greatest challenge since D-Day, as Hitler's surprise Ardennes offensive threatened to split their armies and reverse liberation momentum. Expecting to exploit weak American lines, Nazi forces were caught off guard when Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr. redirected his Third Army northward in days, launching a rapid counterattack that would become one of American military history's most celebrated maneuvers. George S. Patton Jr. was already legendary by December 1944, known throughout Allied and German armies for aggressive leadership, innovative armored force use, and ability to inspire extraordinary troop achievements. His Third Army had been instrumental in the Normandy breakout, France's liberation, and pursuing German forces to the Rhine River. When the Battle of the Bulge began, Patton's forces were engaged in offensive operations in the Saar region. The German offensive beginning December 16, 1944, initially achieved complete surprise and considerable success. The plan relied on 3 armies: the 6th Panzer Army in the north, the 5th Panzer Army in the center, and the 7th Army in the south, with the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel spearheading the drive toward the Meuse River. As German breakthrough news reached Allied High Command, considerable confusion and disagreement emerged about response strategies. Some commanders favored defensive consolidation, allowing the German offensive to exhaust itself against prepared defenses. Others advocated measured withdrawal to more defensible positions, trading space for time while organizing Allied reserves. Patton's response was characteristically direct and aggressive. At a crucial conference with General Omar Bradley and senior commanders, Patton immediately grasped the strategic opportunity the German offensive presented. Rather than seeing the breakthrough as a disaster to contain, he recognized it as a chance to destroy significant German forces that had exposed themselves by advancing beyond defensive positions. The logistical challenge of redirecting an entire army from one axis to another in winter, while maintaining combat effectiveness and supply lines, was staggering. Patton's ability to pivot his Third Army 90 degrees and march through difficult winter conditions to relieve Bastogne was a masterpiece of military logistics and leadership. The Third Army consisted of multiple corps with hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, and countless tons of supplies, all requiring redirection from existing missions to entirely new objectives. Patton's redirection speed astounded allies and enemies alike. Within 48 hours of receiving orders, Third Army advance elements were moving north toward the battle zone. Within 72 hours, entire divisions engaged German forces that had expected only desperate defensive actions from surrounded American units. This swift maneuver relieved Bastogne on December 26th and turned the tide against the German offensive, enabling subsequent Allied counterattacks in January 1945 to eliminate the Bulge, with Germans suffering approximately 80,000 to 100,000 casualties and hundreds of tanks, severely weakening their ability to resist subsequent Allied advances into Germany. Patton's counterattack lit the match, but on Christmas Day, it was tank crews at the Meuse who made sure that fire burned out the German push for good, stopping the German advance at the Meuse River. Christmas Day victory. Christmas Day 1944 proved anything but peaceful for the 2nd U.S. Armored Division as they engaged in one of the Battle of the Bulge's most crucial defensive actions. Nazi armored units aimed to cross the Meuse River during the Battle of the Bulge, but the 2nd U.S. Armored Division stopped them short on Christmas Day, with American tankers' fierce resistance preventing deeper German penetration and protecting key Allied positions. The strategic situation had been developing since December 16th, when Hitler launched his surprise Ardennes offensive. The German plan required rapid movement to cross the Meuse River within days, exploiting surprise and poor weather that grounded Allied air forces. By December 24th, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division had advanced to within 4 miles of the Meuse, reaching Foy Notre Dame near Dinant, their furthest westward penetration, while Panzer Lehr Division captured Celle, creating a narrow advance corridor. However, German advance wasn't proceeding according to optimistic timetables. Fuel shortages, destroyed bridges, and increasingly determined American resistance significantly slowed progress. progress. Narrow Ardennes roads, combined with winter weather, created logistical bottlenecks German quartermasters hadn't adequately anticipated. Most critically, their plan relied heavily on capturing Allied fuel depots, but American forces evacuated or destroyed these supplies before German capture. The 2nd U.S. Armored Division, under Major General Ernest N. Harmon, was positioned to counter the German advance. By Christmas Eve, the division was deployed to intercept the 2nd Panzer Division's spearhead near the Meuse River. General Harmon, a veteran armored commander proven in North Africa and Sicily, recognized his division's mission's critical importance. If German armored spearheads crossed the Meuse River, they'd be within Antwerp's striking distance, potentially splitting Allied armies and achieving Hitler's strategic objectives. Americans capitalized on several German underestimated advantages. On Christmas Day, the 2nd Armored Division launched its counterattack with devastating effectiveness. The American assault cut off the 2nd Panzer Division's spearheads, while a British ambush knocked out 3 Panther tanks and other vehicles, further disrupting the German advance. Fighting around Kelles proved particularly intense. Panzer Lehr Division's Kelles capture represented a German high watermark, but the 2nd Armored Division's counterattack, combined with Allied air support as weather cleared, trapped German units. The narrow corridor held by the 2nd Panzer Division was systematically squeezed by coordinated American and British forces, preventing further progress toward vital Dinant River crossing. By late Christmas Eve, German advance was effectively stopped short of the Meuse River. The failure to cross the Meuse marked Hitler's planned collapse to reach Antwerp, allowing Patton's Third Army to relieve Bastogne on December 26th and enabling subsequent Allied counterattacks that would eliminate the German bulge entirely. But not every battlefield had tanks or gunfire. At Berga, American soldiers fought with something else: resistance against slow, systematic death. Berga slave labor camp resistance, defiance against extermination. The Berga slave labor camp represented one of the Holocaust's most brutal chapters, where Nazi Germany's Vernichtung durch Arbeit, extermination through labor, policy claimed the lives of thousands, including 73 American POWs. Nazi captors singled out American POWs perceived as Jewish or undesirable during the Battle of the Bulge, sending them to the brutal Berga slave labor camp. Despite horrific conditions designed to kill through malnutrition, disease, and abuse, remarkable acts of resistance demonstrated extraordinary courage and human solidarity. Nazi captors singled out American POWs perceived as Jewish or undesirable during the Battle of the Bulge, sending them to the brutal Berga slave labor camp. At Stalag 9B, Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds made a powerful resistance act when ordered to identify Jewish prisoners. He instructed all 1,000 American POWs to stand together, declaring, "We are all Jews here." Despite being threatened at gunpoint, Edmonds held firm, stating Germans would have to shoot all prisoners. This solidarity act delayed and disrupted the Nazi selection process, earning him recognition as the first American soldier honored as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. At Berga, prisoners faced starvation, brutal labor, and constant abuse, yet engaged in subtle resistance by supporting one another. American medic Corporal Anthony Acevedo secretly kept a diary documenting conditions and deaths, a resistance act preserving Nazi war crimes evidence. During the grueling death march, as Allied forces closed in, prisoners maintained their will to survive despite extreme conditions, with 63 American POWs ultimately liberated on April 23, 1945. After liberation, many Berga survivors were silenced by US military security certificates forbidding discussion of their experiences, driven by post-war political considerations, including West Germany's rapid re-industrialization. However, survivors like Anthony Acevedo broke this silence decades later, with his diary and testimonies contributing to the US government's 2009 recognition of Berga POWs as slave laborers and war crimes victims. Even with the war nearing its end, the Nazis weren't done. This time, they tried bringing sabotage to American soil. Nazi saboteur, mission foiled. Operation Pastorius's complete failure. In June 1942, Nazi Germany launched Operation Pastorius, a covert mission to cripple American industry through sabotage. The plan: send 8 trained saboteurs to the US to blow up factories, railroads, and critical infrastructure. Named after a 17th century German-American immigrant, the mission was designed by the Abwehr under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. It was led by Walter Kappa, a former US resident and pro-Nazi propagandist. He recruited 8 men who had all lived in America, believing their cultural knowledge would help them blend in. men. Among the group were two naturalized American citizens, Ernst Berger and Herbert Haupt, and others who had worked everyday jobs in the US, including George John Dash, Edward Curling, and Richard Quirin. After intense training in explosives and espionage at a sabotage school near Berlin, they were equipped with forged IDs, disguised explosives, and over $175,000 in US cash, enough to fund 2 years of operations. They were split into two teams. One landed near Amagansett, New York on June 13th via U-202. The second landed on Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, 4 days later via U-584. Both teams buried their gear and switched from German naval uniforms into civilian clothes, but things fell apart almost immediately. On the beach in New York, an unarmed Coast Guardsman named John C. Cullen stumbled across the team. Dash tried to bribe him with $260. Cullen played along, but reported them instantly. That set off a full-blown FBI manhunt. Shaken and disillusioned with Nazism, Dash secretly plotted to betray the mission. He confided in Berger, who agreed to help. On June 15th, Dash called the FBI claiming to be Franz Pastorius and tried to reveal everything. Initially dismissed as a crank, he then traveled to Washington, D.C. and handed over $82,000 in cash and detailed intel on the entire operation, including a handkerchief coded with invisible ink. Thanks to Dash's defection, all 8 men were captured before they could carry out a single act of sabotage. President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered a special military tribunal, and on August 8, 1942, 6 of the saboteurs were executed in the electric chair. Dash and Berger received prison time for cooperating, later commuted by President Truman in 1948. Operation Pastorius was a total failure. It became a propaganda win for the FBI, with director J. Edgar Hoover taking credit, while Dash, the man who exposed it all, was quietly deported and written out of the narrative. Liberation of concentration camps, exposing Nazi horrors. Spring 1945 marked a critical phase in World War II's final months as Allied forces uncovered the Holocaust's full extent through concentration camp liberations. As Nazi forces attempted to maintain control over concentration camps like Buchenwald and Dachau, American soldiers liberated these sites, overpowering remaining guards. These liberations exposed Nazi horrors to the world, with documentation ensuring accountability and countering future denialism. Buchenwald, liberated April 11, 1945, by the U.S. 6th Armored Division near Weimar, Germany, held about 21,000 prisoners at liberation. An inmate-led resistance, organized by political prisoners, seized camp control hours before US troops arrived, preventing further SS atrocities. American forces found emaciated survivors, corpse stacks, and medical experiment evidence. Subcamps like Ohrdruf, liberated April 4th, revealed worse conditions with mass graves and torture sites. General Dwight Eisenhower visited Ohrdruf on April 12th, ordering documentation to counter future denialism. Local German civilians were forced to witness camps and bury the dead, confronting Nazi crimes firsthand. Bergen-Belsen, liberated April 15, 1945, by the British 11th Armoured Division in Lower Saxony, presented British troops with approximately 60,000 survivors suffering from typhus, dysentery, and starvation, alongside 13,000 unburied corpses. Originally a POW and exchange facility, the camp had become a dumping ground for death march prisoners, causing catastrophic overcrowding. No gas chambers existed, but neglect and disease caused massive death tolls. British forces, shocked by human skeletons, prioritized medical aid and food distribution, though over 10,000 survivors died weeks following liberation due to weakened conditions. Dachau, liberated April 29, 1945, by the US 45th Infantry Division near Munich, was the first Nazi concentration camp, opened 1933, and held around 32,000 survivors. US troops discovered a death train with 4,000 decomposing bodies and found brutal experiment and execution evidence. About 10,000 prisoners suffered from typhus or malnutrition, requiring intensive US medical team stabilization efforts. Mauthausen, liberated May 5, 1945, by the US 11th Armored Division near Linz, Austria, and its subcamps, notably Gusen, held about 20,000 prisoners, primarily political prisoners, Soviet POWs, and Jews. SS attempts to destroy evidence and evacuate prisoners via death marches failed as US forces found gas chambers, crematoria, and mass graves. Their actions exposed Nazi horrors to the world, ensuring documentation to counter future propaganda. The liberation footage was widely publicized, shaping public understanding of Nazi atrocities and establishing the historical record that would make Holocaust denial impossible for reasonable people. These camps were transformed into memorials, preserving Holocaust memory for future generations and serving as permanent reminders of humanity's capacity for both evil and liberation. And that's a wrap. wrap. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to check out more amazing content on our channel. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.